And I think we're live. Okay, let me start with the countdown thing. There we go. Hello! I think we're finally live. I think so. We'll see if someone says something to the contrary. But I guess welcome back to the engine room. This is the third episode we are doing. After the last one we did live from KubeCon. It's been a busy month, so that's why we've not had any since then. But here we are, ready to start again. I didn't just disappear and I came back. All right.
Yeah, for some reason my I'm getting a freeze for my video.
Yes, we got.
Hey.
Now you're back. But no, you're not.
I don't know. Might be my internet. I might just be stuck with that today. Sorry, guys.
Live thing. Oh, you're back. Yeah, it might be your internet. You're coming and going. All right. We can hear you though, so there's that.
All right. We'll just go with that.
Let's start with some intros. I'm one of the two main co-hosts, Alessandro Fael Garcia. I'm a senior solutions engineer at the NGINX community and alliances team. And I'm joined today by Dylan, Javier, Damien. I'll start with Dylan if you want to intro yourself a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I'm Dylen Turnbull. I'm a developer advocate at NGINX. And right now you're probably only seeing me like every other frame. But so hopefully that sorts itself out pretty soon here. I think it's been about a month since the last episode, right? Where we're live from KubeCon.
Did you freeze to your voice? Maybe?
Yeah, about a month since we were live from KubeCon.
Yeah.
All right. Well, now we're Dylan for a bit.
Yeah, I think he might be already frozen. I think we lost him. Comes back. All right. So we're changing the format. Usually it was just the two of us. Sometimes we did have a few guests from the KubeCon episode. So I guess, and it just dropped entirely.
There we go.
He'll be back. We shall hope. At any rate, we're still experimenting a little bit with the format. So from now on, I think we're going to try to have a third guest that's rotating every week, every episode that we do. In this case, though, we're going to have two guests, Javier and Damien, which start with Damien since it's going to be the first guest to speak the most part or join us. If you want to intro yourself.
Yeah. Oh, and there goes Dylan again. Yeah. So I'm Damien Curry. I'm the technical director for the Community Alliances team at NGINX. So I work with all these other folks on the show here.
And then we are also joined by Javier. If you want to intro yourself a little bit.
Yeah, hi everyone. I'm also on the Community Alliances team, and I'm coming more. I think a lot of y'all came from kind of operations type backgrounds. I'm coming from a developer, product engineering kind of background. So that's I've got that perspective on NGINX, and so that's kind of hopefully what I'll be contributing here.
Yeah, that was
Great.
One of the great things getting Javier on the team is getting a different perspective because, I just ran all the infrastructure. I never had to actually write the applications.
Yeah, I think most people in our team, which you will have probably guessed by now, we brought guests from our team, yay! Or mostly come from a systems background instead of more of an application background. So it's good to have different people with different views. And will Dylan come back? Let's see real quick.
We'll see. Rebooting his router, I'm sure, trying to get everything back up and running.
All right. Well, on that topic, I think the first thing we have on the agenda for today's live stream is a little bit of a follow-up from where we left our first live stream after we discussed how to install NGINX, which was describing some of the most basic use cases that NGINX can accomplish and how you would set up NGINX to accomplish some of those use cases. A few of the ones that I have here in my notes, although we'll see what Damien comes up with and is going to be covering, were like setting up NGINX as a web server, setting NGINX as a reverse proxy, and then a little bit of more advanced topics if time allows, setting NGINX as an API gateway and cache potentially. But I guess we should probably start with the basics. Dylan is back just in time.
Hey, woo.
Yes, Microsoft decided to patch on me. Sorry about that. You know how that goes.
All right.
I just rebooted the stream PC, so we're all good.
Yay, and I guess that did the job, actually. All right, so I'll hand it over to Damien. So we're going to be covering some of those NGINX use cases.
Yeah.
Floor is yours. I don't know, whatever you want to do, talk about.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like we touched on the main ones. I mean, the first time I ever ran NGINX, which was very long time ago in the late 2000s, somewhere in there, was just as a direct replacement for an Apache web server, right? Just it was the new toy out that everybody started playing with, and so we rolled it out instead of Apache, and I remember the first thing I saw about it, and I was like, oh man, this is a configuration language that I can look at and it makes sense. Like I can just kind of look at it and it's a lot easier to read than Apache. So that definitely won me over from the start. But yeah, well, I mean, once you get past that, the static web serving, it's like, sweet, you can serve files. That's like not a huge deal anymore. So, I mean, probably the most I ever ran NGINX was in that, reverse proxy / load balancer. A lot of times, even in those situations of augmenting other tools, right? Having them sitting behind other load balancers to be able to do more in-depth inspection on the traffic and make different decisions, manipulate headers, just a lot of that functionality that isn't always found in some other options. Plenty of times running infrastructure in AWS, NGINX always sat behind my ELBs. It was just the only way to make it work properly in my mind. But yeah, I mean, and then the other big thing, like you said, I think you said API gateway there. And I swear NGINX was an API gateway before I ever heard that term. And it's always been a kind of go-to tool for that. And it's one of the fun things with NGINX is all of these things where it's an API gateway, it's a load balancer, it's a reverse proxy. The configs are going to be about, 80% the same. There's just those few tweaks about, treating traffic specifically for an API use case where you're talking about small request and response versus setting it up as a reverse proxy for a standard website which has larger images, heavier traffic coming back and forth, and just being able to kind of fine tune the config for whatever the type of traffic you have. So I know those are a lot of them. I mean, what are the ones we missed, Alessandro? Where haven't we gone yet? Caching, or is that a good one?
Yeah, I think what I had in mind more, if you have something around, was like beyond just talking about it, showing how you will do it with code a little bit. If you have something around the duplicity deploy and tweak.
Yeah, we got a lot of stuff. I don't have any configs on hand, but yeah, I mean, it is one of those fun things of doing all of the tweaking and trying to figure it out. I know one of the very things that can be very complicated in NGINX when you're building these more complex, especially in like kind of API gateway use cases, or even in those kind of static web server reverse proxy use cases, having different location blocks in order to have all of the correct artifacts come from the correct locations. So whether you're loading CSS locally or proxying certain things and having other requests go to different nodes, the location block, and I know Javier did a lot of work with this, and we've been going back and forth on all of the intricacies and fun race conditions you run into when you start having those more complex location blocks, and having a lot more logic built into that, because it can get kind of confusing when you really have those complex configs and are looking at having a lot of different location blocks that are possibly overlapping. So that is always always a fun one when you get into that situation. So you definitely need to keep an eye on that while you're building it out. You know, oh yeah, I mean, one of the other big ones when we do talk about caching, there's a couple levels of caching, right? I mean, there's a lot of the CDN technologies were originally built on NGINX open source. So there is that, you know, that caching level, but also the big caching level too is what has been referred to in the past as like kind of micro caching. So instead of caching static images, you're caching kind of shorter lived, highly requested pages or requests from a certain application, so that you're just offloading that extra overhead onto NGINX where you can.
Yeah, one of the places that I saw this in my dev life was NGINX was the static file server used for a lot of application servers. So if you're running a single page application, the most common stack that I saw this in was Node.js. So if you're running an API server in Node.js and you're running like a React single page application, so in that case, your client-side code, you know, boils down to a few JavaScript files that when you build them, they have like a digest on the end, and then so that when you have a new version, it breaks cache. But running, you know, putting an NGINX server in front of that and saying, okay, anything that is using like a regular expression location to say, you know, anything that ends in .css, .js, all the various .waf, all the font formats, have NGINX serve those efficiently, take advantage of the file caching, and then anything else that's in your /API path or whatever goes to the Node.js server, and that takes the Node.js is a good web server, but it's not the most efficient static file server. So that's one that we saw a lot in the dev world as like a common way to improve user experience by using NGINX.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of that, of just, you know, why reinvent the wheel, right? There's a lot of that logic of, you know, well, you could write this in an application, or you can drop something like NGINX sitting in front of the application and have that extra layer there of you know, whether you're adding security functionality. I know I used it a lot of times where, especially when you're dealing with like legacy applications, especially the ones where nobody is left who really understands the application, and you're trying to security patch it. Well, nobody wants to touch the app in fear of breaking it. So let's drop NGINX in front. We'll do all the TLS offloading, that sort of thing right at the front, and have that extra level of security, and also the security of not messing with the mystery box that nobody actually knows how to operate. I would say probably that's probably one of the biggest use cases of NGINX, is just front ending that sort of solution.
Just real quick, Marco, our old producer, who actually tuned in to watch the videos, asking what's the topic for today, which we should have probably mentioned in the intro, and we did not. The topic is common NGINX use cases, and then extensibility with Damien, one of our guests here, covering common NGINX use cases. And then Javier is going to tell us everything about things you take into account when trying to extend NGINX with NGINX JavaScript. And Boo, who's joining from LinkedIn, has a different question. I don't know if you can see it pop up on the screen, Damien. How about tiered caching? Low res thumbnail images and high res images, if specific ones are requested.
Yeah, so usually in those sort of situations, it's easy for NGINX because it's just serving up a different file, right? So a lot of the times that is another common use case, right? When you're using NGINX and kind of that CDN capability. But the benefit is usually the files are already on disk, and you're not actually rendering them with NGINX. You're just serving them up off there. So again, it's that simple, you know, we've got something to deliver, a static file, and it will just get it there.
Cool.
Yeah, and there's the way that you, sorry to interrupt, Alessandro, but
go ahead.
That's actually something that the browser will do for you. So in HTML, you're used to doing image SRC to get your images, but there's actually a picture tag that lets you set various sources in media that will let you load up those, and those will result with the browser generating different requests or different files to NGINX.
Yeah, and then I guess a lot of the times the kind of value add and the overlay a lot of the CDNs provided when they built on NGINX is that when you deliver those images, they would do the resizing and then send all of the different versions out to their cluster, all their different pops to be served out. So I know that was one of the, kind of black box magic things that you would have to deal with the CDN, and always troubleshooting it when it didn't render all of them properly was always a good time. But, that's the price you pay for not having to deal with all the infrastructure, I guess.
Yeah, it's interesting. All the examples. I mean, I'm trying to think back to the first use case that I can recall in way back before the acquisition. And it's ironically, I know this is going to be a big surprise for everybody, but it was basically as the ingress controller for Kubernetes. Probably the first time I ran into it. Now, mind you, that was the ingress-NGINX, so the community version. And at that time, I had no idea what the difference between that and ours and Plus was. But yeah, that was the first use case that I ran across. I mean, I unless you go really far back and you just go to the standard use case of using it as like a reverse proxy. So.
Yeah, I feel like Kubernetes is now probably one of the big things that people are going, oh yeah, I've heard of that NGINX thing. It's something to do with my ingress controller. I think before that, probably the most common was, well, I was trying to deploy WordPress and the documentation said, put this thing called NGINX in front of it. And that's still a huge place that we have, users first come into contact with NGINX. Has nothing to do with NGINX. It's another tool they're looking to deploy, and as part of that documentation, it recommends front-ending it with NGINX. Yeah,
I'm trying to think of I used it as like a front end to. We were working. I was working on a big IP implementation, and what was it? What's the older automation tool with the Ask Jeeves logo?
Oh,
Jenkins.
Thank you. Yeah. I used it. That was the first time I finally remembered it. That was the first thing I used was for it to front end Jenkins. So that because Jenkins originally wanted an HTTP default deployment. So I was like, well, I can't really put that on a live, or even at the time it was a cul-de-sac network. But I needed something as a layer of obfuscation for Jenkins. So.
And actually, while at it, Mark are asking if you can put NGINX on top of your existing network infrastructure.
It depends what your infrastructure is, but yeah, usually.
Usually.
I know I've said it before. It's kind of the duct tape of like the network stack, right? There's been plenty of times where I've had different systems that they just couldn't talk to each other properly, right? There was something going on in the conversation between the two and it just wouldn't work, and just drop NGINX in front of it and it figured it out. So it's definitely one of those things where it is the duct tape. It is that thing that I've used so many times to just fix random problems, or even more mitigate issues, right? Being able to do like CVE mitigation, where you can block a possible CVE issue while you figure out how to actually patch the back end issue. So I know one of the famous ones, right, with Heartbleed, it wasn't an NGINX CVE,
oh my gosh,
it was an OpenSSL issue. So, but because of the functionality in NGINX, you could just disable any of those attack vectors that were opened by that CVE. So it really did. And that was before I actually came to NGINX, and it saved me a lot of headaches because we had to patch that vulnerability in an OpenShift cluster.
Yeah, no, I remember that too. Cause that was back when I was working with Symantec, and VeriSign actually was so obviously VeriSign being the progenitor of SSL in general. I mean that was like a huge deal for us when that all happened.
Yeah.
So
yeah, that was a huge deal for everyone. It feels like that was stressful time for sure.
Yeah, no kidding. Yeah, what do they call it? A trigger word? Yeah, it was definitely a trigger word for me. That and M.32 dash Melissa was the other one that I'm just like, no, I don't want to hear that word again. The old days.
Oh yeah.
All right. Dylan, you're peaking a little bit.
Am I? All right,
Yeah.
let me turn down.
Also, just discovered we have tickers. You can put things
Hey, look at that.
on the stream. Ain't that cool?
Yes.
Nice.
Tech.
I'd love to hear what people's top 1, 2, or 3 use cases that they've worked with in chat. So, folks in chat, just dump your use cases in there. Maybe a use case that we haven't talked about that folks in chat haven't called out yet.
Can NGINX solve world hunger? No.
The answer is always that depends.
Most common use cases, obviously, I think. But no, obviously, at least the stats we have tell us that it's setting up NGINX as a web server. So, I mean, it's still what most people are using it, I would assume so. Probably then reverse proxy. And yeah, that'd be interesting, actually. Yeah. I don't know what the other one would be this day. So it used to be API Gateway for a while, but I don't know if that's still the use case.
Well, it's always kind of funny, too, because there's that differentiation between like a web server and a reverse proxy. But a lot of times it's pretty much one and the same, right? Because if you're running like a PHP app or a Ruby app, NGINX isn't really running the code. It's proxying those connections to your application. It's just that application's on the same host.
Yeah, it's the only real time where NGINX is the web server pretty much is if you're just serving HTML, JavaScript, CSS, and that's it. Or if you're using something like PHP where it's compiling the PHP code with the FPM module, something like that.
Yeah, WSGI compatible stuff. I think there's some old like PHP
there might be.
And then WSGI is the web server generic interface, I think. And so you can, there's integrations for a variety of languages, but the only ones that use it still, I think, are PHP. And someone's going to talk, because PHP has changed a lot since the PHP that we stereotypically talk about. Mm-hmm. So who knows if they're still doing it. I think that Python for a while was also using NGINX as like the primary web server until GUnicorn and stuff came out. But
well, then GUnicorn and those things, they usually tend to run behind NGINX anyway, which is
you'll have NGINX fronting that, right?
Is that how you say it? GUnicorn? I've always just pronounced it Gunicorn. It's like unicorn with a gun or something like that.
I try to keep my vocabulary peaceful when I talk about technology.
That's funny.
One thing that we saw,
it's like GNU, right?
Yeah, right. We one thing that we saw it a lot as it's still a load balancer sort of reverse proxy situation, but we often had it fronting like our actual API gateways. So like in organizations I worked in, you'd have NGINX that was fronting a API gateway type thing that was handling like feature flagging and more complex routing between microservices. That was written in something like a higher level language, which you really could have accomplished in NGINX. I think it was more of a developer like comfort thing. But what was nice about that is that you always had that NGINX log entry at the beginning of your log. So when you're tracking logs across lots of different services, you've got that. The NGINX log is the starting point, and it's like home, right? And you shoot the NGINX log format into any, like we were using Sumo Logic, the log aggregator, and you get like everything knows how to eat that default NGINX log format and turn it into a nice dashboard or something like that. So that was a nice thing, is that you kind of be tracing stuff throughout the system, and occasionally you'd hit an NGINX instance, either at the front or fronting something else, and then you get that nice little reset of like, all right, this is where we are, these are the headers, these are the anything you see in that access log, and it's really nice to aggregate on those when you're trying to understand something that's making 4, 5, 6 jumps within a complex system.
Yeah, being able to have that like kind of start end to end. You're like, okay, well, here's where it started, and look, it came back here eventually, but you can get an idea, because I know always having those logs when trying to troubleshoot where's the latency, right, or where's the performance hit coming from in this stack, and being able to trace it through that, it's always really helpful.
Mhm.
All right. I think, Damien, you probably have to leave.
Yeah, I gotta run away here in a minute. I wish I could stay longer, but next time you guys invite me, I'll hang out for more time. But yeah, always fun to jump in and do something.
For sure. Thanks for joining.
Yeah. Have a good one, everyone.
Yep.
Later, Damien.
See you, Damien.
Oh, we're back to 3 people.
Yeah, I was just
Then
looking.
we're back. We're never 3 people to begin with. At least it's live stream, but something I don't.
3 people on camera, right? Yeah, I was just looking on the internet, and according to, ironically, SolarWinds, or no, this is Paper Trail. They have a top 10 list of use cases for NGINX, and I'm kind of surprised that, we've touched on most of these. Anyone want to guess what number 1 is?
It's none of the ones we mentioned.
It is actually. It's exactly what you
say,
expect it to be. It's a web server, yeah. And
Okay.
second is reverse proxy, load balancer, API gateway. Number 5 is the one that surprised me. Oh, a firewall for web applications. I don't think we touched on that yet.
Web application firewall.
We
Yeah,
really
exactly.
didn't. I don't. So you used to be able to do it with NGINX open source with mod security, but mod security got end of life. I don't know if it's reached end of life yet, but it got announced. So if it's not there yet, it will be there soon. Which
so
means that there's not really a way to use NGINX open source as a firewall anymore that I know of. Maybe we're using some third-party module developed by someone, or like a mod security fork, something like that. But it's not.
It is still used as part of the ingress sig. Then I think that there's a desire to phase it out, and they're looking at other options as far as what they would want to replace mod security with.
Comes around and scoops the mod security torch. There's not been anyone yet that I know.
Yeah.
Of. So
yeah, it is less common, definitely, in the open source space for sure. I was just surprised that was number 5 out of all of them.
Yeah, I'd say maybe you could use NGINX AppProtect WAF, which is an enterprise offering, and then you get a web application firewall. But that's probably not what they were thinking when they wrote that document.
Yeah, I mean, you could do piecemeal stuff. Like this is the snarky webmaster, right? That redirects all incoming links to somewhere funny, right? If you're hot linking images or something like that. Or our colleague posted something today that was talking about a method to deny bots that aren't respecting the robots.txt, right? So this was, you might have a list of user agents coming in, and some of them are, the Facebook bot and the Google bot. Yeah. And no, this was specifically around preventing OpenAI from scraping your site. But those are all good bots. They'll listen to the robots.txt if you tell them to go away, right? But if you have persistent bots, you can always use an NGINX map on the user agent for those bots and return a 413 or something to have like a shoestring and bubblegum. So it's not a capital WWAF, but it's a thing you can do that forms one of the primary functions.
I find it amazingly interesting that we've come like, I wouldn't call it full circle, but we're halfway through the circle or 3/4 of the way through the circle, where the zeitgeist has everybody talking about GPT and OpenAI, and now we're to the point of preventing it from scraping sites, which kind of basically hinders it, which I almost feel like that should have been step 2, and then unleash it on the internet. Right? It's like there's a lot of sites to scrape out there. Yeah.
It's okay. The real question is, when are we going to get a ChatGPT support in NGINX, right?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Somebody's. If we thought of it, somebody's working on it. Yeah, exactly. I mean,
or something.
There's very few occasions where you think of something and it's an original. Someone else hasn't already thought of it and started working on it. So,
right.
Yeah. The number 6 is like a cache. I thought that would be higher in the list.
It's never
caching
been one of
proxy.
the top use cases.
Really?
People that use it as a cache are very extensive power users usually, but
Yeah.
most, I was gonna say average Joes, but most folks that use NGINX don't have a big enough need for a cache to set it up as a cache.
And I think in the from my world as a developer, a lot of times the NGINX instances were in such critical places that they didn't want, the rank and file developers going and messing with them. So say I need to cache some response. In general, we would tend to do it at the application layer, using essentially something like Memcached or Redis or something like that, because it's more of a familiarity thing. It's two things. It's a familiarity thing. It's like we know how to do that, and then there's also, like I said, I don't think I've ever worked any place where I had access to, like, there was always like certain NGINX things that I would not personally have access to be able to go and do that easily, right? So there's a bit of a organizational aspect to it sometimes.
Real quick question from and forgive me if I get this wrong, Jambunathan from chat. Yeah, I got it. And where can I get certification for NGINX? And Boo actually chimed in and said that it is correct. Yep. That actually is is being worked on right now. So it is an effort that we're working on getting out to the public. You're involved with that, right, Javier? I thought.
Yeah, I was going to say I actually have a meeting on my calendar tomorrow to review questions for the certification. So
yeah, perfect time to ask this question.
I can personally attest that it's actively in progress.
And yeah, so there you go. Work in progress for like the past probably like 2 years, but a lot of care is being put into it to make sure that it meets the. I forget the name, but apparently there's some certification standards agency out there and whatnot. So it's not an easy thing to do properly, but it will be done.
Yeah. I've been learning a lot about it.
We do have resources that also give you some, not badges, but like some level of recognition insofar as knowing about NGINX works. I'm trying. See, the thing is, I cannot post to LinkedIn. From StreamYard, which is what we're using right now, but and I cannot show things on screen. That's right. Maybe I can. Let me try to share my screen real quick.
I can if you want me to, but just shoot me the link.
Let me see. How did you? This is good because I'm gonna have to do it in a second. Share my screen. Share a screen. Okay. There we go.
Yeah, I think the process for validating it.
Yeah, there we go.
Oh, there it is.
And it's not showing Perfect. The URL, which is not great. Anyways, if you go to nginx.com/learn/nginx training, you will see there's some resources here, some courses that you can use, and I think some of them are self-taught, some of them actually involve a class with a teacher, and some more professional exercises or guided exercises, and you will get a certificate out of it. It's not a full-on certification, but it's not a bad solution for in the meantime. And as you'll see, there's some that are free on demand. Some of them do have a price. $400 is not cheap necessarily, but depending on the level of the course, some of them will be, the price will vary.
Yeah, that's a good resource. And, one of our partners, DigitalOcean, which I'm sure everybody's familiar with because they make some of the best trainings on the internet. I think I would love to know the percentage of people that actually get started with NGINX, ironically, through DigitalOcean. So there's a ton of how-tos on there, and I'm sure you've already scoured YouTube. But I think you're really looking for it sounds like an official certificate. So that you can toss it on LinkedIn. I think it would be great, and this may be something we can take back, or maybe it can go through you, Javier, is seeing if we can get a badge, because the community really likes the badging system. Like, I was pretty jazzed when I got my speaker badge from the CNCF. I don't know why. It's just it's like trophies on Xbox or something like that. It like means nothing, but you're just like, yes.
Yeah, I thought they were stupid, and then I got it, and I was like, yeah, it's actually cool. Then I got to my second one,
Yeah.
I was like, okay, so now
Yeah.
you start adding badges to your collection, and suddenly
You got so many badges, yeah.
Actually, I can create a banner here real quick.
There you go.
How to use next courses available at. Okay. Cool.
Yeah, well, you're
Wait,
putting
what
that
happens
up.
if I don't press the button? What happened? Okay, I don't like that.
There we go.
Actually, that's okay. Need to figure out if there's a way to have like a little pop-up show up for a second or something. There probably is a way.
Yeah. I mean, that's something we can explore. I mean, I think it's just a matter of working with StreamYard. I mean, it's I know how to do it in OBS, but I don't know if that comes through and is interactable. Like I think this one with StreamYard is actually clickable.
Oh,
right?
actually,
Or no,
instead of
it's not.
I have an idea.
So, learning curve, right? So there's a million streaming solutions out there, and they all have a million buttons. So, hopefully that's somewhat helpful, John Bunathan. I think that once that certification goes live, hopefully, I don't know who knows how long that will take, but I'm sure that there'll be a ton of amplification that goes on behind the scenes to get it out there.
Yeah, because they have to do testing, and it's actually pretty rigorous. They write a bunch of questions, they do testing, and then they'll cut a bunch of questions, and then they have to replace. So we're at the phase, I think, where we're just going to start testing fairly soon. There's a few rounds.
Are they doing that through the registered testing places where you go in and you sign in and you go to the booth and they put the like for instance for net or what was it, net backup? Yeah, net backup training. When I worked for Veritas, you had to go into a room and sign in, and then they sat you in a booth, and then it was a very structured and formalized testing. Is that how that's gonna pan out, or is it gonna be on the internet?
I'm not privy to the details of the testing.
Gotcha. Fair enough.
The person who's running it has developed a lot of other certification tests, and I'm sure. I mean, it's a formal process because it's probably primarily, I think, based on statistics. So they'll have a test group, and they'll be like, okay, if everyone gets this one right, it's not meeting the criteria of if questions that go either way are too esoteric, people are confused, they're too easy, everyone gets them wrong. These type of things are trying to get it into if you have done your study, you will be able to do the test type situation.
Yeah.
So.
Very cool.
Real quick, because there's an ongoing conversation.
Yeah, as far as ETA, I can't.
At first mentioned, I think Slack, you'll be able to know that the certification went live via Slack. If not, if you want to ask any questions about ETAs or whatnot, that's probably the right place to do it, because I don't think any of us here are privy to the details, but someone in the community Slack will be. And it's also a good place to be in case you have any other NGINX related questions, or want to talk about potential use cases and things you want to do with it. And even if you have some ideas for like future development, feature ideas, whatever, for NGINX or any of our other open source projects, that's the place to do that. And
you can also jump on there too, and you can hit us up, because we have our own channel up on Slack. So if you even if you have for topics you'd like to hear us discuss for future episodes,
that's true.
Jump on there.
We have an engine room Slack channel over there. And as far as ETA, I mentioned it before. It's probably going to be a few months at the very minimum. Honestly, I think we'd be lucky if we get it out by end of year. I don't think it'll be out any time sooner.
Yeah, I don't have
rigorous the process has to be.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. As someone who's part of it, I think we're at least a few months out.
Yeah. Cool. All right.
Awesome. But it's coming, so good news there.
Yep. All right. The next topic on the agenda is going to be extensibility, even though real quick before that, I want to try to demo some of those use cases we're talking about.
Yeah, do it
Well,
up.
I think Damien will do too, but I guess we did not make that part all that clear in your prep meeting. That it was
That's right.
not only about talking about use cases, but showing how to set them up. So let me see if I can share my.
Yeah, this is a good time to kind of point out to the community and the folks that are watching. So we actually go through quite a bit of effort to try to make this as unscripted as possible, because we don't want it to feel like a webinar. We want to feel like it's an interaction with everyone. So you're gonna have moments like this where we're just winging it, and that's just the nature of the style that we want to present this kind of content to you guys in, so that we can have the time to stop and interact with you guys, talk about random things like certifications and other things that people want to talk about.
All right. So, funnily enough, Kivir just told me via our chat that he has a demo that includes reverse proxying. So I guess that makes my life all that much easier. I'm just gonna show you real quick how to set NGINX as a web server, which, as it turns out, is the default setting nonetheless. Yay, easy things. So if you install NGINX from our official repository, which is what we recommend, and if you want to learn more about how to do it, I suggest going back to episode 1 of the Engine Room. This is sort of the directory structure you'll find. You'll get your NGINX config files will live within etc NGINX. That's the last that way. This is sort of what you get there. The first. Oh, Dylan. Okay, it's still there. I thought Dylan had died again. He did not. He just removed himself and Javier from the screen. Aha! Magic. Anyways, you'll see a bunch of files get installed by default by NGINX. You can ignore the FastGI, SCGI, UWSGI, whatever parameters, or those are there in case you want to use NGINX as a PHP web server, as a Python server, or things like that. Then you have your modules, which will now be empty since these are like external modules you might install. And then you have your MIME types, which is just to recognize some data formats. The important things are your nginx.conf file here and whatever's inside the conf.d directory, which in this case is only one file, default.conf. So if you want to set NGINX as a web server, first thing that you need to do is not touch the nginx.conf file. It uses some very sensible defaults. It sets your log to notice, which is for the most part okay. It means only things above the notice error level will be posted to the error log. And well, until all of notice and above. And then close the MIME types, default type, whatever you can ignore, and sets the access log. And that's pretty much it. It sets to send a file. You can probably touch TCP not push if you want to enable it, but you don't really need to for a normal web server. And I guess if you really wanted, you could uncomment gzip. But again, for a normal web server, that sort of thing is you don't really need to do. So that's all within the main context, and then the HTTP context here, which is where your web server will be living on, includes the files within the conf.d directory. Should be noted, with NGINX, you can also use a stream context, which is good for TCP and UDP streams, but those are usually only good for proxying information between servers and whatnot. So I would not worry too much about that, especially, again, if you're just doing an HTTP server. Kabir is asking me what is send file over here in private chat. That's a good question. I do not quite recall, but we can pull out the docs and they will tell it to us. So send file. Okay, that's a free BSD parameter, which lets you preload data using AEO, which an asynchronous file system. Fundamentally lets you speed up your HTTP web serving capabilities, or if you're proxying or whatnot, and you can fetch the data in advance. For in one way or another, it let you preload the data to speed up the request. Let me go back here. D. Let's check what's open in the default.conf file. So this is the default file you get when installing NGINX from our official repositories. Everything here lives within the HTTP context. So what it'll be doing is creating a server block within your HTTP context. And within that server block, you can tell NGINX that it needs to be listening on port 80. And within port 80, I mean, you can set the server name. It's a little bit irrelevant, really, unless you have multiple servers. If you set it, it'll be listening at port 80 when created under localhost. And within that port, if there's an incoming request to this last location, which is actually a catch-all location, so this will capture any and all requests coming to localhost at port 80, it will redirect that request. Well, it won't redirect the request, but it will fetch the HTML file and an index HTML file from the directory here. So you need to specify both, really, when you're doing when you're setting NGINX as a web server. You can get away with not specifying both. Potentially, like with the index page, you can put a full path in it, if I recall correctly. And if you only specify a root directory, by default, they'll try to fetch an index.html file from the root directory. That is just good practice to specify both. And then from there on, really, that's all you need to do to set up NGINX as a web server. If you want to be a little bit more fancy, you can create a 404 error page, just in case for some reason they're trying to create an endpoint that does not exist. In this case, this should only happen if you have you should only get a 404 if there's no file here, if index.html or .htm does not exist. It does exist by default within this directory, because NGINX installs it by default. So this really should never pop up. But if you're changing the file directory and whatnot, or maybe you have some automation set up in place and you want to be sure you have a safe backfill, it's not a bad idea to set an error page. And to do that, really, you just need to uncomment this directive if you don't want to do anything too fancy. Then you can also serve 50x error page if you so want, in which case it will redirect you to the NGINX default 50x HTML page, which again lives within the root directory here. A little bit of a tricky NGINX thing here is that you don't need to specify index, the index directive in this block, because instead of using the casual / command, you're using exactly, which is what the equal symbols means, that endpoint of 50x location, which is fundamentally a internal redirect from this error page directive, which means that NGINX will go look for that 50x.html file within the root directory here. That's a little bit more complex behavior, how NGINX works with location blocks and the various names he said to location blocks. I'm not going to delve too much into that right now. All you really need to know is that fundamentally this error page here redirects you to this endpoint, and if you query this endpoint exactly within the location block, it will fetch that endpoint exactly from this root directory. And then if you're also installing NGINX from our official repository, you'll see there's some commented out block showing how to use PHP within NGINX. There's no PHP in this small demo / default Docker NGINX image, which is what I'm using. So this will not work if I uncomment it, but if you were to try to be using PHP in your web server, this is how you will do it. You will set up a location with a proxy path to your internal server, and then within that internal server, well, that's if you were using an Apache PHP server. If you're using FastAGI, which is the most common NGINX use cases, come on, NGINX use case, or PHP FPM actually is the other one. All you do is use the relevant fastCGI or PHP FPM directives telling NGINX where to find that PHP file. And I think that's pretty much it for NGINX's web server. Kavir mentioned it was going to cover reverse proxying. What's the other ones? API gateway, sort of like a reverse proxy, but just slightly more advanced. So if you know how to set up NGINX as a reverse proxy, it's pretty easy to set it up as an API gateway. Caching is a little bit more complex to set up, but that basically requires its own like half-hour demo to show properly in action. So that's something we'd maybe hold for another episode where we delve more into caching and whatnot. And they're back.
Hello.
And Dylan is muted.
Hello. You're muted, Dylan.
Still muted.
Me and my 3,000 mute button. Sorry. that was awesome.
Try to get a few less mute buttons.
Yeah, I know. I mean, I've got to engineer that. Give me a couple of years, and I'll figure out how to do one mute button for everything. I do have something I want to show real quick. It shouldn't take real long. So since we're talking about use cases, one of the most common ones I work on is the ingress, is the Kubernetes ingress. I'm not going to go through the whole demo because that's like 45 minutes long. Maybe in a future thing we'll do that. But I do want to show something on my desktop here. And let me see if I can get this to pop up correctly. That's the wrong desktop. All right, so let me go back to full cam. Give me 2 seconds. Well, let me just, can you, I'm going to forward you a link real quick. And then
okay.
we have a repo out there called NGINX Ingress Workshops, and it covers everything from how to get it up and running on a Rancher cluster, or on Rancher desktop with a Kubernetes cluster. You can add us as the ingress, and then you can use that to actually run through about I think it's 10 workshops of different use cases, from web servers to proxy or to caching to basically all of the core functionality you would do once it's up and running in Kubernetes and you deploy our coffee tea demo into Kubernetes. It covers like all of that stuff, and it's pretty much once you through the basic tutorial that I wrote, where you can stand up Rancher desktop with our ingress controller on either a Mac or a Windows box. There's tutorials for both of those, no matter what platform you're on, and the Linux one's pretty straightforward. You just do the same stuff except do it on Linux, which is quite a bit more straightforward. And then once you have that up and running, there's a series of tutorials where you can go through and explore different use cases. And let me get that link for you real quick. So,
yeah, I was gonna say, where's the link?
I'm working. I got to stop talking first. I can't talk and type. I'm too old for that. Wrong.
Too many times. Let's just have some stuff. What happens if oh my god, that looks actually too bad. That's a QR code for the NGINX community Slack. And I don't know how to put it somewhere that's not in the middle of the screen. It's for future reference. Settings.
Yeah, if you want to tee up the next segment, well, I'm getting this link and I'll just drop that to you and we'll put it up there. But yeah, I would highly recommend going out to that workshop. We actually did the workshop with Rancher. It was a masterclass with them. And I think that as a follow-on, because not everybody is familiar with Rancher, I think I'm going to take some of the stuff we learned from Timo when we were at KubeCon and do the same thing using our Docker implementation as well, our Docker desktop implementation.
Well, in the meantime, I guess, yeah, we'll get started on the next section, which is actually perfect timing, right on the hour to the second main topic, NGINX extensibility. So what does one mean by extensibility? I guess would be a good way to put it. To start, so you have NGINX. NGINX can do a lot of things, but sometimes it cannot do the things you want it to do, and you're like, how do I do this thing that NGINX cannot do? Do I go find another tool? Do I go I don't know, develop a C module for NGINX, which is something that probably like 4 people in the world actually would go ahead and do. Well, and most people will probably just try to find another tool that does the job. But as it turns out, there's an easier way to do that, which is extending NGINX. And you can do that by using scripting languages supported by NGINX. There are 3 scripting languages that you can use. There's Perl, which is probably the least commonly used NGINX extensibility language, even though I've seen a few people use it. A few Perl power users out there. They do certainly exist. And then there is Lua, which is probably the most famously used language to extend NGINX. That's what OpenResty uses to add a ton of features to NGINX. That's what if I'm not mistaken, the community NGINX Ingress controller also uses that to add a ton of features on top of NGINX. Conga to some extent, if I'm not mistaken. I don't know if they're still using NGINX actually these days, but back when they were certainly using NGINX as their main API gateway, they were also using Lua to extend NGINX. So it's been used over and over, and it works. There's a good reason for it. It's very easy to use, and there's a lot of talks about it everywhere. But it has a major issue, which is that it hinders NGINX performance quite drastically. NGINX is known for being highly performant. One of the main reasons I threw it in pure C, just to try to maintain that performance as much as possible. And if you get Lua on top of that, you're fundamentally not really destroying, but you're not really taking advantage of one of the top NGINX features. So a few years ago, I forget when exactly, like 5-6 years ago, I think, NGINX came up with its own solution to extending NGINX, and that was NGINX JavaScript, which is an in-house implementation of JavaScript, which then gets compiled to I don't know if it's like pure C necessarily. I think it is. It gets compiled natively into code that's highly compatible with NGINX fundamentally. And that is the language that I think Xavier is going to talk to us about here, go over some of the pros and cons of using it, and things to keep in mind. And I think he also has some cool demos rallied up showing how to use NJS in action. Because really, if you want to extend NGINX, it's probably, most people know some level of JavaScript. It's probably easier to use JavaScript than parallel Lua at any rate. And it's even better if you're not going to be losing performance while doing so.
Yeah, I mean, people have done a lot with Lua. You shouldn't. I don't have familiar with Lua, but I mean, obviously, the OpenResty stuff that got done and the stuff that the NGINX community controller is using, like I think you can obviously get an acceptable level of performance out of Lua. I think that in NJS, the key thing when you're thinking about doing an extension is, well, usually it's like, I don't know how to write Lua, so I don't want to maintain something in the language I don't really know how to write. And most people know how to write, at least be dangerous in JavaScript. So that's the benefit. The other benefit with JavaScript is that JavaScript's paradigm by definition is kind of event-based and non-blocking. And so it actually jives really well. It actually it works really well with NGINX's the way NGINX likes to deal with things. So it doesn't like.
I think that's one of the main issues with Lua. Like it drastically hinders the NGINX performance if you run into blocking operations.
That's right. Yeah, it's easier.
Yeah. Otherwise, if it's for smaller extensions, whatnot, it probably doesn't make that big a difference. But if you're developing a very big use case and you run into a blocking event, that's where things can,
Yeah, and NJS benefits also from having being developed by people who are close to the NGINX core team, who, they really made. When I look at all the decisions, and we'll kind of talk about it in a second, but when I look at all the decisions that they made with NJS, it's kind of always with a focus towards performance and being efficient. So they're taking a lot of the principles that made NGINX successful and kind of putting those into their implementation with how they did JavaScript. So like Alessandro said, like it's its own engine, right? So like, you're used to writing stuff with Node.js uses V8. That's the engine. So Node.js is like the API, but the core engine is called V8, and V8's the same thing that runs in Chrome. Now, since everyone gave up, it's also the same thing that runs in Microsoft Edge, I think.
Yeah.
I think the only browser that's using a different core engine is Firefox, which is using SpiderMonkey. But yeah, so
I think Safari still does its own thing too.
Really? I thought Safari. I could be wrong. I don't. Safari has become the Internet Explorer of the 2020s. I keep getting stuff breaking in Safari and not anywhere else. But anyway, I digress. So maybe what I'll do is I'll show how, like, kind of the simplest possible, like how you get started with NJS, and then we can talk about like what's possible from there. You can get pretty complex with it, but I'll kind of talk about how maybe I don't recommend that. So let's see. Can y'all see the screen?
No, but now we can.
All right, cool. So y'all saw a NGINX configuration file that Alessandro showed you before. And the most important piece, if you're using I'm running NGINX compiled locally on my machine, so you don't need to do this if you're using the official distribution, I think. You just have NJS. So that's one thing to note. You don't have to install anything extra to work with NJS. I compiled myself, so I've compiled NJS and as a dynamic module, which is why I'm doing this. But basically, NJS provides you with a list of NGINX directives that are specific to NJS, and they all start with JS underscore like that. And so the first thing you do is you write a script. So I've written a script in the same directory here called script.mjs, and we'll get to that in a minute. But all I do is I tell NGINX to import that script, and this is the alias. So I'm saying here, take script.mjs and make it available in my NGINX configuration under the name script. And I'm using the most basic. There's a few other directives that you can use to kind of hooks that will let you invoke JavaScript to do work. And I'll kind of go over those in a minute, but this is the one that just serves your whole request using JavaScript. So this will let you just write JavaScript and return whatever you want, right? So a good example is going to be, so here I'm just returning 200, but let's take a look at this invocation real quick to make sure it's understandable to y'all. So I'm saying JS content, which is the name of the directive, and I'm giving it one parameter, which is script.hello world. And this script matches up with this alias I created up here. And then hello world is the function that I'm going to be passing as the JavaScript function that's going to be the handler for this location block. So this is listing on port 4000, and it's just saying, hey, use this JavaScript function to handle this request. So if I go to my terminal and make it a little bit bigger. Oh, why am I not being able to make it bigger? For some reason, anyway, sorry about that. But you can see I get back a JSON response with hello world, and that's being created by NGINX entirely by this script. So you export a function, and when you export that function, you get the NGINX request object, or sorry, the NJS request object, and it's got a bunch of functions, which we'll go over in a minute. But I'm just doing the most basic thing. I can say return 200 success status code, and I'm just returning some JSON. So that's like the most basic usage. So I can go and say hello engine room live stream, and just with my knowledge of JavaScript, I can change that and get that in. So you can kind of use your knowledge of JavaScript. And what's really nice is that you can put in logic that otherwise wouldn't be possible in NGINX, right? So if you want to say like, if you want to mess with the headers and say like r dot headers in, if headers in, say if I have a specific header I want to pull out, if I want to expect a header called hello stream to be there, maybe we're going to say welcome. If it has a specific value, right? This is something that you can do in NGINX configuration, but might be kind of more on the advanced side. Then I can say let response, and then I can say and then if I don't have that one, I'll say no header, right? And then I'll just put that in here, and then let's reload it. And I've got some scripts set up to reload, but this is just doing the basic NGINX reload. You'll see the command it ran there, NGINX-C, pointing at my file -s reload. So now if I query that again, I should get back no header, right? But if I give that header, and what did I call the header? Hello stream. Did I get that wrong? We'll see if I remember how to specify header in curl. There we go. So if I pass that header, NGINX JavaScript we were able to run some basic logic in here, and we could do a bunch of other stuff like if that header is there, we can say like just header, or I can say take that value. This might be actually something that is definitely not possible, right? I always get this wrong. I wonder if the C is capitalized there. But so if I say hello stream, and then I'll give the value with a capital W, it failed because I'm not going to spend too long on this. Yeah, I'm not quite sure what the error is here. But in any case, you can take the content of it. Let's just do that. There we go. So here's an example of me taking the header in and passing it through as a key as a value to a key in the response. So that's a basic demo of NJS. Kind of to come back, and I don't know, did you have any, I haven't given this together with you, Alessandro and Dylan. Any thoughts on NJS or anyone from the comments? Questions?
I know that from a community standpoint, it is of peak interest for folks that at least I work with on the Ingress SIG. We talked about this in the past. They, I mean, Lua, I worked with Lua way back like in 2011 when I worked on CryEngine stuff. And it's a very limited, and it's relatively slow by comparison to NJS. So, and since most people are not generally inclined to try to do natively compiled C, then this is the next best option. So I know from a community standpoint, there is quite a bit of interest, but I think that differential we talked about previously, where it's sort of Java, but it's not like the Java you're used to, or as Alessandro put it, it's not your mom's Java. So that could be a bit of a learning curve. That being said, everything can be learned, and to quote Spider-Man, with great power comes great responsibility. So.
Yeah, I think it's one of those. That's a great point, because I think that's where I see people getting, I got frustrated with NJS when I first tried to learn it, because you have to remember that this is something that's meant to do something. Usually, and where is NGINX usually, right? NGINX is usually at the very front of what you're doing. Anything that you do in NGINX is going to be an added cost to every request that comes through your system, right? And so, NJS takes a lot of pains to be performant and, memory, good with memory and things like that. But yeah, it's kind of the best usage for NJS is stuff where it's a simple thing that needs some logic that's kind of beyond the scope of configuration. I really encourage people to write their own NJS code. I know that as JavaScript developers, often your gut is to go to npm and try to download a library that does what you need it to do. But the thing to remember is that NJS is its own JavaScript engine, and as such, like, it doesn't have compatibility with some of the more modern JavaScript features. It has selective compatibility, so it has the ability to do some of the nice asynchronous things, like it has compatibility with async and await. It has compatibility with the modern variable scoping stuff like let and const that make JavaScript behave a little bit more like a sane programming language when it comes to variable scoping. But there are differences, like especially around how regular expressions are handled, because NGINX, it's using NGINX as its core engine, and so NGINX uses PCRE2, which is the I believe the Perl regular expression engine, which is different. JavaScript has its own one, so there's some little things that you got to watch out for. And my advice is just to, there's a compatibility page on the docs site. And so take a look at that, understand what you can and can't use. If you have certain things that you need to do, like a really common one is like, changing XML to JSON or something like that. You can pull in libraries, but you just got to test them, a lot. So there's a bit of a invest in learning it. It's not a big learning curve, but do understand it and then go into it. And I think you'll save yourself a lot of trouble and you'll get a lot of value. Because I think the times I've seen NJS being used most effectively is like, in a lot of cases, NGINX is already there in your system. So like a lot of people use NJS for, they've got a legacy application that has NGINX behind it. Everyone's scared to touch the legacy application, and the legacy application only does basic auth, but they're using JWT auth, internally for the rest of their more modern systems. And so they'll have something to say, okay, let's take the permissions or the grants from that JWT token, decode them, and then put them into basic auth as we pass it to this legacy app. Now, whether that's an appropriate security thing for you, that's something to decide. But it's one of those things where NJS is there. It allows you to have some logic, and it lets you kind of get the job done without, going and doing some big overhaul of this legacy app. So that's the case I've seen it most used in, and where I was inclined to use it, as I need to make little tweaks to a request before it goes somewhere else. I need to change a header. So maybe your application expects a header in a specific format. And you're in the process of doing a transition to a new format. NGINX, NJS extensions can provide that nice translation layer. And those are nice, simple use cases that are always going to be fast, that you can kind of get in and surgically put in where it needs to go. And like I said, likely it's already there.
Very cool. Very good. So it's akin to being the scalpel as opposed to like the complete re-engineer of everything like you would with natively compiled C, or dare I mention our recent edition of Rust, which is again in the same category, right? So it's I think one of our colleagues likened it to being Rust flavored C. So.
But I mean, I think they're very different. I think NJS is made to be a little bit more user, like you don't have to really understand as much about the internal workings of NGINX to write NJS scripts. And people do write very big, important NJS scripts. It's just you really have to get in deep and learn about it if you want to implement at that level. The Rust stuff, you have to understand like the NGINX phases and know exactly where you want to hook in. And you have to understand like the data types that exist inside the NGINX code base. So it's a little closer to C, but you're using a language a little bit more safety built in. That's going to be more familiar. But yeah, I think that Rust would be like, oh, if I know Rust, I can get into writing native modules for NGINX. Whereas maybe C was hard for me. Whereas NJS is more on the consumer side of like, I don't need to become an expert in the internals of NGINX. I just need to get some logic done that I can't do with. Like usually you can get a lot of stuff done with map and like internal routes, right? In a NGINX conf, but NJS is that little escape hatch if you need something a little bit more complex.
Yeah, and I feel like the Rust stuff will get there. I mean, it's really new. There's a lot to do with it to be done in that regard, and I don't know this for certain, but I would imagine that we would see better support for. I think some of the newer wants and needs. Like, so I correct me if I'm wrong on this, but Rust is quite a bit better at doing larger memory management, and I think isn't it better at multi-threading as well than C is? This may be hearsay. I know the same. I know that goes for Go, but I'm not sure if it goes for Rust. So, and real quick, I just want to give a reverse shout out to my friend Benoit who is joining us today. I put something in chat, but I think it only goes to YouTube and Twitch. It doesn't actually go to LinkedIn. So
Correct.
Good that you could make it, Benoit. I'm glad to see you here, my friend.
Yeah, for some reason the LinkedIn integration with StreamYard is not the best, but well, that's what it is. Say, I don't know if Rust is necessarily better than C. It's just easier to code and deal with than C. C, you have to be very careful with memory management. But you can do pretty much everything in C. You just need to know what you're doing very well to make sure you don't have any memory leaks or like unsafe memory spaces when that. Rust simplifies all of that a little bit for you.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not gonna. I'd be the first to say that I know very little about Rust as far as what it delivers over C, but
it's a video game, right? You code in a video game, and
what is that editor? Yeah, I know someone wrote a Rust-based video game editor or game development tool. I can't remember what it was called.
There's actually a game that's called Rust.
Okay, not that one. Yeah. That's funny.
Yeah, I think the thing with Rust, having messed around with, I do a little bit of Rust, and I've messed around with the Rust bindings for NGINX, and the thing is, what Alessandro was hit on was it's the memory safety, right? Like you don't have to take all the care that you would normally. I mean, you still have to take care. It's just got a different
it's not
there's
like
a different system around it. And then also just modern developer ergonomics, right? Like I can open up a Rust file in my text editor and get all the completions. The experience of compiling Rust is, if you're familiar with a modern programming languages, I'd say Rust is like top of class in like developer experience for a programming language. So there's some of those things that are really nice that you get, which might help you wrap your head around some of the NGINX concepts, because the Rust bindings that NGINX maintains, they'll come through in your editor and all that type of stuff. So you get a little bit more, you get a little help.
Yeah. I mean, pretty much that. C is definitely starting to show its age. It's still probably the most performant language out there if you know what you're doing. I mean, it's probably most performant usable language. I'm sure if you go down to like the MIPS level and you program everything in MIPS, it'll be even more performant.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I mean, I've been in the business for about 25 years now, and I actually having worked with a number of companies where everything they did was basically compiled C. And then a little bit of C++ on top of that. So things that, most of the C was related to comms development and driver development, and then everything else was written in C++. But it's still, neither of those languages has really kind of done super great at multi-threading. So, which was the big deal. Now we have cores that a single core, just a garden variety, like desktop core now has 18 to 20 cores in it, and that's not even with hyperthreading. You throw in hyperthreading and you've got a load of cores, and you're dealing with a language that was never really created to work with that many cores, because it wasn't even a thing back then. So it's just it's definitely one of those things where updating the newer programming languages are at some point will kind of eclipse it. But you're right. I mean, there's still so much C out there. It's because it was the king dog for so many years. So
Before we move on to anything else, yesterday when we were talking about the agenda one that you mentioned, Javier, something about suggesting people like not use node modules and things like that if they can.
Oh yeah,
when
that was what I.
using JavaScript.
Yeah, in
A
NGS.
little bit more on that.
Yeah, I mean, it goes back to what we were talking about of it being a different engine. And
Yeah.
so, fundamentally, 99% of packages on NPM are written with V8 in mind, right? So that means, and there's a few key areas where NJS is different. One of them is support for language features. So it's fully compatible with ES5, which is a very old revision of the ECMAScript spec. But it's moved forward and, it's implemented things that are, were needed, but it doesn't have all of them. So you may run into compatibility issues just with syntax stuff. The other piece of it is that because a request is short-lived, and the way that NJS works is when you load up your code, it's interpreted, and it kind of, I'm going to get the technical details wrong here, but at a high level, it stamps out a VM that has kind of done as much pre-work as possible, and then on each new request that is handled with NJS, it clones that and uses that for the request and then throws it away at the end. And that's done in the name of efficiency. And so one of the choices they made is they choose not to actively garbage collect memory, reclaim memory while in the scope of a request, because it's meant to be short.
Yeah.
And when that VM is thrown away, that memory is all reclaimed and NGINX keeps ticking. Libraries that are written for V8 may not necessarily expect that. And so there's a way that you write performant NJS code, which might be different from how those libraries might be making performance optimizations that are specific to V8. So it's one of those things where it's like, if it's your hobby server and you can get one of them to work, cool. If you are at a big company and you are deploying this in production and it's mission critical, and if it fails, you're paging people and you're having a major incident, that's what you have. You have all of the doubts, the little what ifs, the little subtle bugs that might come when you're using code written for one engine and running it on another. So that's the reason behind that recommendation. It doesn't mean you shouldn't do it. It just means you should be very careful and cross all your I's and dot all your T's when you do decide to do it. And you may have to transpile your code, which adds some complexity to the development tool chain.
Yeah, probably try to avoid doing it if it's like a minor package and something you could just re-implement yourself, stuff like that. I did see that on a thread the other day, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, some of them just work, right? Like what was it? I did some like XML to JSON converter or something. I was playing with. I popped it in and it just worked, and that's cool. Cool. Sometimes it just works. And
you're like sweet. There's 2 more hours I don't have to spend today.
Yeah, and like I said, if for me as someone who's worked in an environment where I've carried a pager, I would absolutely not trust that. If I were on the hook to get paged for it, I would import the code. If I'm running my blog where I talk about, like, I don't know, death metal, I'll let it ride. Right, if that goes down, then I'm not getting woken up in the middle of the night. So
do as I say, but not as I do.
2 things you did there that set my head into a spin for a few minutes was reversing the T's and the I's, which it took me a second because I think I just auto-corrected that in my brain. And then the pager thing, I was like, when is the last time I carried a pager? And why would anybody page anybody? It's just like, I forgot you came from pager duty. So I know. It's just a different kind of page. It's like the other day someone was trying to send my wife a fax. I mean, I haven't seen a fax machine in probably 6 years, 10 years.
Sending a fax
in a while. Faxes. It's a thing.
Yeah. Well,
it's like all of 10 people in the world can still do it.
Construction guys in the middle of nowhere still get faxes. So, all right, cool. That's very awesome. That's a lot of ground to cover, and really, it's a lot of this is just kind of scratching the surface because I think earlier Damon referred to NGINX as the duct tape of web servers. I've heard it referred to as the Swiss Army knife of but maybe it's a Swiss Army knife with a roll of duct tape that pops out. I don't know. But either way, it's a super powerful tool, especially when you add in the sheer number of use cases that it covers, and almost the limitless capabilities for extending
Yeah.
it.
We used to have this, I don't know, infographic kind of slide or something where we discussed that you could basically potentially run your whole network infrastructure from like a customer to an endpoint using NGINX. Different use cases for NGINX, like you have your NGINX CDN, your NGINX traffic load balancer, then you have your reverse proxy, your web server, application server at the end. And now with NGINX seated on one hand, which is an application server, a native application server, and then with NJS to extend NGINX and do whatever you want to do with it. So I mean, it's as true as ever. You could potentially just run your whole stack using NGINX. It's probably not the most recommended way to do some of the things you're doing, but you cool. That's a cool science experiment.
Yeah, I think that's kind of a tenet of any kind of architectural design, is never throw all your eggs in a single basket. Yeah. I don't know why I said hat, but I'm probably still a little off with the whole pager and T's and I's thing. So
yeah, the before we get off modules, the one thing I do want to say is that the Rust bindings are new, and I know there's a lot of people who are interested in Rust and interested in modifying NGINX. So if you are interested, I think that all the Rust bindings are open source, and they're really looking for people to give feedback, to play with it, give them use cases. Like I think I'm looking at the repo right now, and I'm seeing that a member of our team is implementing a request for an example of a load balancer suggested by someone in the community. So they're definitely putting effort there. People are watching the repo, and they're looking for folks who, maybe you're fluent in Rust, and to kind of point out, kind of like with NJS and JavaScript, to kind of go through and point out, oh, this doesn't feel right to me, and then get it and work on getting it into a mode where it does feel right to someone who has Rust expectations. So that one's a good one that we're looking for folks to come and contribute to, or if it even is just an idea, looking to get that one off the ground.
Yep. Yeah, I mean, getting more and more community involvement is kind of like in that community as well as many others. And if we haven't said it enough, by all means, come join the Slack, because not only are there channels to discuss this particular topic and each one of the facets of this topic, from everything from NJS to native compiled C, Rust bindings, unit. We talked about that, and there's a little flavor of NGINX where there are sub communities that that number in the 60 to a couple hundred range, that if you can't get your question answered, that's always being monitored by all of us on this particular stream, but as well as most of our development organization across the globe. So
I'll come code review your NJS code. I've done it first.
There you go. There you go.
We are the NJS guy.
Well, I was able to tee up the Ingress workshop thing, so I might slide that in here before we start doing the wrap up stuff. That's probably only take about 10 minutes, and that'll give us 20 minutes to talk about what's coming up in the next stream. All right,
yeah, I was gonna first mention if Javier wants to talk about some of those demos, NJS demos that he sent.
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah, I'll make it quick. I think.
Yeah, just make it real quick. It's probably better if you chat about them than if I just post along somewhere.
Yeah, actually, I'll make it quick, because this is just going back to Alessandro's statement about, Dylan's statement about being able to run NGINX everywhere at all, like at the application layer, as well as at the load balancer versus proxy layer and all that. And I did a talk last year where I went and can you pop my screen up? Yeah, yes. There we go. So this is the we'll probably put it up there somewhere, but I got a repo that has 3 discrete demos of doing just stuff that you probably wouldn't want to do in practice, but using NJS as like a web server, like a rich web server thing. So like an example would be, I had an application where I wanted to, let me see if I forget how I coached this, but something about committing investment fraud and trying to get people to invest in a startup using an application. This is all false, by the way.
I mean, yes.
I wanted to build a site about childcare, and all I had was a web application dealing with dog sitting. Like, Rover is in the US. Rover is a company that lets you find kind of like Airbnb for getting your dog in care. And so this uses NJS to filter, to take requests to the application and dynamically convert the body of the return JSON response to remove all mentions of dogs and turn them into mentions of children. And so it's an example of using some of the more advanced hooks for NJS. So it can filter the body coming out, it can filter the headers. And it's, like I said, too big an example to go into fully, but I'll just show you the JavaScript so you can kind of see, oh, this is my fake code. Where's the part where I actually, here it is. So I've written some JavaScript code where I say, all right, every time I see the word dog, I'm going to replace it with the term human child. Anytime I see the word leashes, I'm going to replace it with a really fun toy. We're going to park. Bark is going to be replaced with cry. So just taking the output, and then with NGINX, this JS body filter hook will give me chunks of the body. And I'm aware that this is a error-prone method of doing this, but I'm going through and replacing those things. And so I think I might have it up and running. There it is. Okay. So if I make a request, this is supposed to be like a listing. So this was supposed to.
Blood running.
I'm not going to show it to you because I don't want to waste your time starting up everything.
Yeah,
but basically, there's a bunch of examples there of like that's an example of using NJS to make a whole like web server that's serving up JSON responses. So it's an example where you could have like NGINX acting as a reverse proxy, routing to that virtual server, which is then hosting, pretty major code that is doing stuff, with NJS and giving it back. There's an example in there, that repo, which I'm not sure if you can post it in the comments or whatever, allows you to generate QR codes using NJS. So it'll actually serve back an image with a QR code that has the content of whatever you put in. So that's an example of using NJS as more than just a quick translation layer, change this header, and having it be more of a, you could write a full-on sort of web service using it. Again, whether or not that's a recommendation, I don't know. Depends.
It might get, it seems like a really good thing. You could maybe build in Mad Lib's version of that, It's kind of the same sort of thing. You just put in your own words and then it just parses everything out for you, which is probably already built now that I think about it.
Yeah, like on a more realistic note, one thing it could do, right? If you've got NGINX fronting, say, an application, in some cases I've seen people do things where they build a whole microservice to do some really small thing, right? Like they might build a little microservice to generate a UUID in the specific way that the system wants a UUID generated, just for one service. So these situations where you've got some little task that you want done, and people might write up a whole, Go-based microservice or Node.js microservice in it and have an HTTP, API and then reroute stuff. And, that's one of those cases where you can say, all right, in NGINX, this route is going to route to a little snippet of NJS that does some stuff, right? Maybe it's generating that UUID that you want, and then that snippet will redirect to your main app. So you can kind of have this lightweight, it's maybe you're trying to test out that functionality, like a small piece of functionality, to see if you want to move it out of one application and into another. So it can be a way to sort of experiment with that stuff without the heavy cost of, I'm going to put up a whole new application to make this work. So there's stuff that you could do that could be kind of experimental to solve problems, maybe proof of concepts for things, or solve small problems where you could actually have those kind of web server uses for NJS that might be interesting. And I think Unit is also incorporating this. So with Unit, which I think y'all talked about in the latter episode, can actually route to snippets of NJS to do small tasks, which is interesting.
That's actually cool. Yeah. I'm glad that that's being thought of right out of the gate.
But are we going to get Rust bindings for Unit? It's a good question.
Actually, that is, yes, I believe that's true. If I thought I saw when they did the community event recently, they talked about that in the community event.
I did not.
When? That's a different question. So don't quote me on that. In fact, don't quote me on anything because
I wasn't there.
Plausible deniability. That's what I always say. Awesome.
And I think we have enough time to go over that use case you mentioned earlier.
Yeah. And it's really just more of a pointer to a pointer. So I'll just go ahead and share this out real quick. I'm going to switch into a different mode because my screen share is a little different because I have to share off this system and not the one I'm streaming from. But give me just a second here to pop up this ticker. Where did I put that? NGINX demos, blah, blah, blah. Workshops. This guy right here. Oh, you did it already. Man, oh man. It's like we're a click behind each other. I'm always a click behind you. Maybe that's because I'm old. All right, so let me go into this solo mode, and I'm going to share out my screen real quick. Throw my camera down there. There we go. So this is actually the repo. Can you guys see that all right? I can make it a tiny bit bigger if you guys want.
It would probably be better if you turn on the background white. It's all very dark right now.
Switch into
light mode. Yeah.
Let's see.
Where? There's an option to do that from GitHub, if I recall.
Yeah, I'm just trying to think. So is there a clicky button, or am I gonna have to go through a bunch of rigmarole to get that to happen? So, I'm not even sure where to do that in GitHub because I think what it does is it picks up whatever the system.
It does, but there used to be a way. Appearance. Okay. If you go to your profile settings under appearance, it should be right there.
Under appearance.
Yeah, that's not your settings.
Edit profile.
No. Go up top.
Here.
See your icon there. Settings.
Yep.
There should be a settings thing somewhere.
Okay, gotcha. All right.
Appearance. There you go.
Okay. What's the I guess let's just go with light default. Oh my god,
that's probably better.
That's gonna go away right after we're done doing this. So now I gotta get back to where I was here. So
probably just click the link again.
Gotta go back to the future.
Yep, I'm gonna go back. Just relax, guys. You guys are so impatient. You kids these days and your flying machines. All right, there we go. All right, so so this particular repo, NGINX-ingress-workshops is off of NGINX Inc. As you can see up here in the top, this is the URL's actually already in the ticker. And there's a number of items in here, but the one area I would say focus on is the Rancher area because this is mostly to do with Kubernetes. And I mean, this is technically all to do with Kubernetes, but everything I think the other tutorials might work with Kind. This particular one, if you go into down here, you can see that we've set it up so that you can walk through essentially a Rancher desktop environment setup. And then there's a really long set of steps This is if you're starting from nothing. So if you've never done anything with Kubernetes and you just want to start learning, you can go through this, and it basically sets up a number of tools, which we covered in the first one of these sessions. And then right down here, when you get to this part, pull the NGINX Ingress Workshop from GitHub. This is where you pull this, and then after that, you can deploy it into the local K8s environment, or K3S environment in this case. Most of these, this is designed to work with Rancher. So it gives you the step 1 through done set of steps to be able to put the Ingress controller on Rancher, as well as the Rancher desktop, as well as the configurations you need to do to turn off their actual load balancing and ingress tools, their default ones. And then once you're done with this, if you go back into here under the docs section or under the labs section, you'll find that there are 9 labs that range from everything with everything from setting up the basic coffee tea demo to doing setting up as a reverse proxy, setting up multiple web clients that run all on the same thing. And you can do all of this we were able to complete this on, I think, an M1 Mac with 32 gigs of memory on it, which is not most of the time people are running with that level of system. Or if you have a desktop system, you could just do it that way. And then there's also a Windows tutorial. If you're not a Mac person, you just go through the Windows tutorial, also out of the Rancher or the Rancher area. And the Windows walkthrough basically tells you how to set it all up using WSL2 and the tool chain that is essentially the same exact tool chain with a few minor changes that are Windows based, to be able to do all these labs on Windows as well. So yeah, go here, check it out. This is actively monitored. So if you have questions, you could just, submit an issue. And either myself or the 2 or 3 other people that work on this will answer the question, or you could just drop it into the Slack channel if you have questions about it, and we could follow up if something's not working right or something gets out of dated. We're trying to keep it up to date as much as possible, but things change pretty fast, so just let us know if it's not working. So yeah, that's that. That covers. Whoops, that's not the one I want. This is the one I want. Yeah, exactly. Let's see. Now we got to switch back to that mode. Yeah, there you go. You're already on it. All right. Yeah. So there you go. Ingress on K8s or K3S.
What if I'm new, because I'm kind of new to administrating Kubernetes and also like choosing an ingress. So what kind of stuff should I be paying attention to? Like I just set up the NGINX Ingress controller from my local Kubernetes example. Maybe I should go through your workshop, but what are the things that kind of you look at when you're evaluating Ingress and and the way that you interact with it? Like what's like the things that you look at and like the thing that you're proud of that gets shown off in that particular demo?
Well, so one of the things that you can't do with there's 3. Let me start with the number of ingresses that are just NGINX, right? Mm-hmm. Not any other ingresses. Like if you wanted to use I don't know, Envoy, or if you wanted to use what is that other one? I actually I don't work with those that much. Traffic, yeah. Well, actually, Traffic is I've worked with quite a bit to do basically as a reverse proxy to manage certs. They do pretty good. I'm not gonna lie. But I think the thing that is different that sets us apart. So let's start with the 3 versions. So there's Ingress-NGINX, which is the community-driven version. That's the one that if you go out there and you do I don't know, a kind install of Kubernetes, or you do any of the base installs of Kubernetes, you're going to get Ingress-NGINX, which is essentially NGINX core, and then they built all of the ingress as an add-on using Lua, which we just previously talked about, right? So, which makes it a measurable degree of a measurable degree slower in a lot of the things that you would do. It's perfectly great for the use case of, hey, I'm just doing a one shot. I want to understand Kubernetes. I don't want to get into the nuts and bolts and start changing systems out just yet. So it's good for that, and it's good for dev test, and in some cases for very small production, it's good too. But when you start getting into really, really large amounts of traffic, or if you want to be able to manage upstream servers, that's something that is not built in that ingress control, just because the difference is they use Lua, we use natively compiled C, and then we've also added the ability to do upstream servers and a number of other things that have been added to our ingress controller or pulled down from our commercial ingress controller, which is actually the third ingress controller, which is the plus version, which is basically just a recompiled version using our plus code and a couple of certificates to be able to use the commercial edition. That actually adds things like rate limiting and SSL offloading and a whole bunch of other things. But that's something you might consider once say you're in like QA and you're pre-prod and you're like, I want something that has SLAs and support agreements and all of those things, FIPS 140-2 certification out of the box, stuff like that is stuff you would consider when you would move to the third ingress controller, or potentially do that. But I think the big ticket items are things like being able to set up a caching proxy or set up or be able to monitor upstream traffic is something that we exclusively do with our ingress controller, just because it was solved a different way with many of the other ingress controllers. So for instance, like most people will use like routes, Kubernetes routes. We actually went a different direction, which we found to be, well, at least in our estimations, a more efficient route to be doing things within the Kubernetes environment, which right now, the OSS version of our stuff, which is how we refer to it, there's ingress-nginx, there's nginx-ingress, which is ours, which we call OSS, fully open source, and that particular one is, I think it has the second largest, or I think behind the core community page, it's the second largest community inside our community environment, and it is the number of downloads. I think the last time I talked to the PM team, they were saying they were surprised at the number of pulls from Docker Hub for that particular version of the ingress. It numbering in the millions, or the 1 point something million pulls on active, or I think is either monthly or daily. I can't remember the time interval, but needless to say, it is relatively popular. But it is different how we manage things. Like for instance, how we actually build an ingress resource is a little bit different than what you would do in the community ingress. And that's something we're kind of looking at, bridging the gap between what we do for what the community is used to, and how we do things using custom resource definitions, which is all of that's documented as far as the differential between those on our website. But yeah, those are the big differences. Things like more advanced functionality, and I think the biggest one I think people look for is the upstream server monitoring and management capabilities of our ingress.
Cool. Thank you. That was a question I was wondering for a long time. I didn't know about the performance thing, because I remember I had someone come up to me at a conference who was like a solutions architect for a big company, and he was saying that he would move people off of the community ingress to our ingress, which got them out of Lua land, and he would see big speed increases there. So that was
and it's important because I actually sit on the ingress SIG. with a gentleman by the name of James Strong. It's not that implementation is bad. It's just that almost everybody should understand that. Yeah, when you're dealing with high level programming languages, there's always some measurable level of performance hit. It's just the nature of how things work.
Yeah. To be clear, this was a person who was servicing like really, really big enterprise clients who were, dealing with that level of traffic, where the level of traffic where your load balancer might become your bottleneck, right?
Yeah, I wrote an article a while back that on the CNCF blog that talked about comparing Kubernetes to a Subway sandwich line, and I would look at it as the difference between do you want a 6-inch Subway, do you want a foot long, or do you need one of them giant party subs because you're going to be feeding like 80 to 100 people at a time. So they're different. They have the same ingredients, but they just have different use cases that they satisfy. So.
Yeah, I was just checking. Looks like there's an open issue in the community ingress to explore replacing Lua with NGINX. So
that's
under mind. Who knows when/if they'll get to it, but they're definitely
they've asked for our help with that. So then that's something. I remember I talked to you about this, Javier. And we were just trying to find a time where we could get you and the primary developer over there on. And maybe to let him pick your brain for a little bit. So, but that's something that they're exploring for sure.
Can you use NGINX with our ingress controller? I think you can, right? If you want to extend it.
Well, I mean, it's built on top of Core, so anything Core can do.
Yeah, it should
I
be
would
able
assume
to, right?
Theoretically you could do. I mean, I don't know that 100% for sure, but
But I thought you knew everything about ingress.
I think it would be because with ingress controller, because I know that the primary interface to the NGINX ingress controller is the standard Kubernetes ingress interface, but you can give it snippets of NGINX config, and so I imagine that you could probably that's interesting. We should try it and see if we can make it work, because if you can invoke one of the NJS directives, I just don't know how it would provide the separate file to the ingress, but who knows? We'll have to try it out and see.
Absolutely. Maybe that's something we can do in a future call, which is a good segue to our spot. No, I'm just kidding. to what we're going to be doing in the next
Subway,
call.
Apparently.
Yeah. Maybe it's just because I'm really close to lunch and I'm hungry. I don't know. So. Yeah, so what do we got coming up? Next one?
Wait.
No, here we go with the music.
For Gadget. Why not?
Why not?
Feeding the ducks. I don't like that. I don't even know. Shelf release.
So you give Alessandro too many buttons and things go in directions that. So there we go. All right, so coming up next, I don't know about this music either, but yeah.
Coming up next, we're going to be doing some smokers and barbecues for the summer season.
Yeah, here we go with the barbecue analogy. So we are close to lunch.
It is officially summer, so
Yep. Mm-hmm. Yes, definitely. So yeah, next time. What are we going to do? We're going to talk a little bit about automation.
Everything automation. And by everything automation, I actually don't mean everything. I mean the two main things that both Dylan and I are familiar with. In my case, that's Ansible. Going to be talking a little bit about the various Ansible roles and the Ansible collection we have for NGINX. And you can use it to deploy NGINX across, honestly, potentially 1,000 targets if you want that. My demo will not cover that many targets, but still. And then I think, Dylan, you were going to talk a little bit about Terraform, right?
Yeah. So, there's been a need and a want to be able to figure out how can we push Terraform to a target. In this case, I'll be kind of talking more in the realm of AKS. But as with most things, when you're picking an automation tool, the the target really should be irrelevant to whatever the automation tool is. So in this case, I'll be talking about Terraform and Terraform as it applies to an AKS cluster, and how we deploy our NGINX our NGINX ingress solution to AKS, and then I might touch a little bit on Crossplane, which is another automation tool. That's a much bigger example, probably the better half of another talk on automation. So
and Dylan, to be clear, when you say AKS, you're talking about Microsoft Azure's like hosted Kubernetes service, right?
Yeah, exactly. So rather than deploying the cluster or building nodes, deploying the cluster using the standard tools, it's just basically telling Azure to spin up a cluster, which in Terraform is really, really easy to do. The key factor, I think, is figuring out how to disambiguate your Terraform automation from wherever it lives. So talking about things like, where does the TF state file go, and how do I manage, do I want to manage Kubernetes resources with Terraform, or do I want to leave that up to you just doing it through standard manifests, or also including, do we do this with Helm charts or not with Helm charts? It's a pretty large topic to unpack, but I'm going to try to condense it down into my half of the next Engine Room show. So
I just love this music.
You're like a kid with toys, man.
I am a kid with toys.
Javier, take away his toys.
Yeah, I mean, we're both very far away from Alessandro. So.
Yeah, there you go. I know, right?
I forgot.
Yeah.
Just wait until I add more things. All right.
So
not callback thing. I was gonna say again, obligatory. This looks so bad, but obligatory reference to the NGINX community Slack. We're trying to get people to join all the time. It's the place to be if you have any questions about NGINX, if you want to hang out with anyone that works at NGINX, if you want to interact directly with the dev team, if you have any suggestions for the roadmap, if you find any potential bugs that you think would be better to talk to someone with in person versus via GitHub machine. That's the place to be at. So there's a link down the screen right now. It's community.nginx.org/join Slack. Then there's also this giant QR code, which I'm just gonna leave there for like a couple seconds. I should have removed the banner.
Yeah, and for future, if you do join us on the community, we've got a bevy of topics that we've teed up for what we assume the community wants to talk about. But at the end of the day, what we really want to talk about is what you want us to talk about. So if you want to join up on the community Slack, get into our channel. You can just get your invite, join the channel, and then just tell us what you want to talk about. And if we find some topics that you guys pop in, we can noodle on them for a little while and then come up with some interesting things to talk about. And generally what we try to do is do a little discussion, try to put a little demo together, try to have a discussion with you guys about what you find interesting. And we can go from there. So sorry.
Cool. I think that's that for this week's episode. I don't know that we know for sure when we'll be back, but we'll probably are going to try to go back to a regular schedule, even though we really never had a regular schedule because our second episode was aside from KubeCon already, so that threw everything for a loop. But, the plan is to go to a sort of regular schedule, maybe monthly, maybe bi-weekly, have some stuff to figure out in that regard. But
I would say minimum, you'll see one of these at least every 30 days. And ideally more often if we can swing it. It comes down to scheduling and getting the right people together and whatnot. And once all the logistics are worked out and we can put together some content that makes sense for people, or at least the skeletal structure of some content to talk about, we'll be back to talk about more. So This is number 3 in the
every
can.
Couple weeks and just like hang out and talk about stuff.
Yeah.
And it's that.
All right. For those folks that are still with us, thanks for joining, and we'll see you next time. Take care. I'm not dancing.
Well,
I'll leave that up to you.